Lovely. Thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you, all of you, for coming at this not so easy time of the day. It's the last session that we do in the small working groups, and also it's a session right after lunch when actually it's still lunchtime. So thanks for being here and filling this room so that we don't feel too weighty on the side of the presenters. I will try to start my presentation again and limit my time to ideally only 5 minutes, because I'll only really like to set the stage. The announcement for this workshop said Tina Silbernagl of the Program on Inclusive Violence and Crime Prevention and partners. So the ladies and gentlemen sitting here are actually South Africans who are here in their own right, who can talk much better than me about how they, in their particular fields of work, are addressing the issue of violence and crime prevention, safer communities, community safety, and citizen safety. And mention it all because there's differences between the different approaches, and there's also differences in how you go about conceptualizing it. Just a few words about the project. The project has just started at the beginning of this year, will hopefully run, if we have the continued support of the Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, for 10 years. It aligns itself very strongly with what the government of South Africa is trying to achieve in one of its highly prioritized outcomes, which is called All South Africans Are and Feel Safe. The goal of the project is a community of practitioners is enabled to develop and implement their services and activities to increase the safety in public spaces under the active participation of young people. And why we are looking at a project that does not really focus on developing new innovative approaches to crime and violence prevention is for these reasons. When you look at the situation in South Africa, you really have world-class policies. You have enormous amount of policy papers, strategies that are dealing with the issue of safer communities in a really innovative and more modern way than many European governments have. So that's already there. Also, you have an enormous amount of interventions that happen by highly experienced practitioners, organizations, different actors that are there. You have processes within local government, within national government, that are already there addressing the issue of violence and crime prevention, and a huge breadth of different actors from government, from civil society, within academia, who are addressing the issue. And you have a majority of young people. Roughly 60% of the population is under the age of 25, even more when you call it up to the ages of 35, which is the official definition of youth. And at the moment, many young people are seen as the victims or perpetrators rather than as part of the solution to safer communities. So what the project will be doing in hopefully the next 10 years is to really look at a community of practitioners, and some of these practitioners are sitting here, and look at how what's happening anyway can be strengthened in a way that it becomes even stronger, that people talk to each other even more, that people are able to take one initiative that has happened in one municipality and really evaluate it, look at it and see, is it applicable for my area? If yes, how can I replicate it? How can I adapt it? If no, is there something else that somebody else in a similar municipality did in some other part of the country? So we are not trying to reinvent the wheel. We're not trying to reinvent anything, but we're trying to look on one hand very strongly at the local area, at the municipalities, at where the action is actually happening, and then try to infuse the platform with the existing knowledge and try to support with a bit of professionalization to include the safety and youth lens in municipal processes. That's what the project will try to achieve, and because we can't do this on our own, we have an actually rather elaborate steering and cooperation structure. Now this is not even fully up to date, and there's kind of daily actors that are being added. We will work alongside the main duty bearers for the issue of crime and violence prevention in safer communities, starting from Treasury to the local to the network of local governments, to the police, obviously, to academic bodies, and, as you might also see, taking into account also the European Forum on Urban Security, or processes like or platforms like the German Prevention Day. Today, because I have just started the project and I can't really talk about neither approaches nor successes, I would just like to hand over the microphone to my colleagues from South Africa, who will give you an impression on their work, starting from the provincial level, looking then at the municipal level, and finally looking at an innovative solution on how to make the systemic approaches very tangible. That's it from me. Gilbert, please.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for the invitation to be here and to share with you some of what is happening in the Western Cape. I'm from Cape Town, and you've already had an introduction to the crime situation in Cape Town. Please do not be put off. You're welcome for a visit. The diversity within South Africa is such that while we are a developing country, the pockets within cities, within the provinces, within the country actually belie the fact that there's such a variety of what you will find if and when you do go there. I'm going to look at it. I only have 10 minutes, so I'm going to summarize what I'm saying before I start the presentation in case I miss it out. Basically, what we're looking at, there are a number of initiatives, and we've discussed many of them here at this Congress. Very useful crime prevention strategies, and the provincial government is very supportive of that. And so I just want to put that up front, and certainly the networking and what we're doing. What this input is about is to try and say, now, what in fact is the core business of a provincial government besides supporting financially and in other ways? What can be own affairs, as it were? And that's what I'd like to share with you today. It goes down a route of, in fact, legislation. Now, let's not get confused about saying it's more about law and it's more about police and it's more about corrections. Not at all. We are trying to see how we can greater beneficiate, in fact, what happens with the police. Where do we go from? Oh, we've got a slide.
Just press enter if you like.
Oh, okay, you can press enter. All right, the Republic of South Africa, it's a unitary form of government, population 50.5 million, growth rate of 5%. GDP estimates are written there. A high diversity. We have 9 provinces and 11 official languages. In the Western Cape province, we have 3 official languages, but there are 11 in the country. The government is constituted in 3 spheres, namely national, provincial, and local government. And the Western Cape province, 5.2 million people, and you can see the situation at the bottom there. In terms of the governance, and this is really the slide that I'd like to talk to, the police service is under the control of the national government, a total of 193,000 police officers. To note that the budget for the police rose from 9 billion in 10 years ago to over 60 billion in the 2010-2011 financial year. A rate that was much higher, in fact, than the growth rate of the country, not sustainable. It's part of the argument then that do you sustain crime prevention through more and more policing, more and more law enforcement? And the argument is no. Crime levels are high, as we've heard. Murder rates are written there. Sexual offences and robbery with aggravating circumstances. Put it into a perspective, in Cape Town, something like 40 murders per week. Okay, now that's quite frightening. It happens in certain areas of the city, certain hotspots, whatever, and it is serious. It's a serious challenge. We can talk a lot about statistics. The provincial government's mandate is limited to the oversight of the police. There's a national police, the police is a national competency, but there are also municipal police services, which we'll hear about later. In other words, the metropolitan, the cities are able to have what are called metropolitan police services. And they are law enforcement officers, they can carry weapons, and they are trained in different areas of policing. The provinces have no policing mandate at all. Our mandate is one of civilian oversight. And so the input on this paper is to say, now, how can we actually use that civilian oversight in the attempt to make the police hopefully more efficient in a win-win situation? So we want to use this oversight mandate as a catalyst to improve policing. The policing have a very poor image in South Africa. Allegations of corruption. The current National Police Commissioner has been suspended. The previous one is in jail. And it creates an atmosphere where there is, in fact, a loss of confidence in the police. And there are a lot of good policemen, a lot of sterling policemen. And if this kind of attitude continues, we may find that they will be compromised as well. Now, I'm not saying this about the police to run them down. I'm saying that the police have to be the police. There's no alternative. The private security industry is not the alternative. So it's in our interest, and certainly that's been our thrust, to say we have to make sure that the police, as it were, come right and come to the party. And so this is the purpose of this exercise. We want to use the oversight mandate. We want, due to the diversity of the country, there exists no one-size-fits-all. There are 9 premiers in 9 provinces, 9 legislatures, and there are 9 MECs, members of the Executive Committee for Community Safety, and in the municipalities there's a safety and security portfolio as well. So quite diverse. We want to then look at how can we gather information through community structures. And what we're trying to say is that currently the police hold all the information. The police statistics come out annually, 6 months to 9 months after the previous financial year, because they first have to verify it, etc., which makes a mockery of trying to do some intervention based on that, because it's dated. Some of it will be 18 months old. And yet that is the official police statistics. And when it does come out 6 months later, there's a big hullabaloo in the newspapers, and people analyze it and make predictions and comments, and etc., which is what they must do, because that's when it comes out. Our argument is to say if we are totally reliant on the police for information and statistics, we're never going to get to the bottom of the problem or to find viable solutions. And so what we're trying to do, we cannot gather statistics because it's held by the police. And what we're wanting to do, we have a situation where we have what is called community policing forums, which may be in other countries as well. We have 149 police precincts in the province. Each one has related to them a community policing forum made up of volunteers who engage in activities related to supporting the police. The relationship varies from sycophantic to the police to totally antagonistic to the police and anything in between. We've been able to do some research of all 149, and we've been able to show how the relationship varies across the different precincts for different reasons. Now, we would like to argue that it would be very useful if those community CPFs, the CPFs, could gather information for the Department of Community Safety on a regular basis. For example, we're suggesting that they visit the police station 10 times a month and report on things like how many people were on duty. Absenteeism is a huge problem. How many vehicles were available? Was there visible policing? What's the state of the police cells? How many people were in there? There's an occurrence book. Now, you may say from a German perspective or where you come from that that's what you do routinely. We do not do that routinely. So we are arguing that that needs to be done. Now, you say, why can't you do it? Simply, our mandate, as I've said, our mandate is one of oversight, is based on the national constitution. So the national constitution gives us the powers to do civilian oversight, but it's written very vaguely. And so the sections that empower us are open to interpretation. And the police comment to it, yes, you can do that, you can investigate complaints. And our current real-life scenario is that the current police commissioner has insisted that if I wish to register complaints from the public who phone us about complaints, it all has to go to one nodal point, which is his office. It has to be under my signature as the head of department, and then I wait for a response. It's too centralized, it's too big. He's the PC, he's not often in his office, and so this thing is just stagnating and the public lose faith in that system. So we are arguing that we need a better system. Now, to address that, provinces have the ability to have own legislation. Not many provinces have taken up that opportunity. and maybe it's partly because of a different political regime within the Western Cape. But what we are looking at is and we've produced a bill called a Community Safety Bill. And that bill, when it becomes an act, will then give us the legislative power to demand that answers be given for the complaints, that we can have the CPFs visiting the police stations and gathering information and incidents which we hope to put together into a comprehensive reporting situation, which I'll come to later. So gathering of information through community structures, as well as the analysis of information within the research environment. And that includes trying to gather, there's a lot of information around. Everybody's gathering information. And we would like to put things together. I've got 2 minutes, put things together so that we can try and then influence the process going forward. And then verification, and then direct interventions and resources to areas most in need, and that's the linkages then to the current crime prevention and newer interventions. What a busy slide again, and it gets busier. What we're trying to say is that we are trying to look at fixing the future. I mean, there's apartheid, there's all that type of thing. There's the situation with the police. How do we actually fix the future? How do we focus on opportunities to address often unique needs of the provinces? How do we create a culture of mindfulness within government about opportunities for safety beyond just decreasing crime? And we spent a long time explaining, even to the ministers, to the politicians, this is not about reducing crime, it's about increasing safety. And if you increase safety, you reduce crime. Politicians like the line that says reducing crime. They like to go onto platforms and talk about how they've reduced crime. We are arguing, please talk about increasing safety. It's a whole of society approach. It's not just about more law enforcement officers. That's what the public in fact want. They want more officers, more policing. We are not saying policing is wrong. Obviously we need policing, but the whole of society approaches, and we can talk about that. And then the focus again on a safety budget rather than a security budget. Not more money for more guns and more armed people, but more money for safety. This is a busy slide, but it shows the mapping of a basket of services. And if I can just look at one of these, you can see the civilian oversight over here, and then alignment of policing resources and needs, the annual confirmation of policing needs. I've indicated to you if we could visit the police station, we'd be able to gather information. We believe that we can gather a lot more information, including health information around mortuary statistics, forensic investigations, etc. We believe we can then put together a balanced basis of what the state of safety is in the province, or the state of policing is in the province, more than just relying on a dated police statistics that will come through later. So you can see all the interventions on this side, which would link then to what NGOs and other bodies are doing. I don't have a lot of time to do that. But lastly to say, and this is the last slide, lastly to say, we also want to make sure that the politicians who love to have rapid responses, who like to have rapid interventions, that they can show they are doing something to the population, we want to try and say, we want to institutionalize this into the legislative framework. So if we start in the top there, we can see we want to monitor police conduct, we want to deal with complaints, we want to monitor efficiency, and we want to liaise with the community. That then comes down to the computer where we process everything and we produce an annual public report on the state of policing. That's not good enough just to publish that. We want this tabled by the MEC in the provincial parliament. We want it referred to the relevant standing committee. Currently the standing committee can call the PC to account. It's done ad hoc. We want it formalized. And then in the standing committee there can be public debate, public participation, citizenship part of it. And then there's an accountability. The PC and the police have an opportunity then to engage with this report in a public debate. A report goes to the legislature at the bottom here, goes across to the MEC, recommends that to the provincial cabinet, and the provincial cabinet then can deal with it as they see fit. And then there's an iterative process that goes around. There are other national portfolio committees where it could go to as well. And what happens out of this is that also in the legislature, in the legislation, it says that the provincial cabinet, the provincial executive committee, are able to hire and fire the PC. In other words, they can recommend to the national minister to dismiss the PC. Now, you can imagine that there's nothing that says how you can do that. We hope that by having a system like that, the PC can actually measure his performance and his performance can be measured. So in conclusion, to say, we are trying to look, and we've put the bill together, we've done some trials around using communities in this, we've got the software, we're looking at the system, the information system to put this together, and now we're progressing with a bill that we hope will allow us then, in terms of the law, to make this happen for great efficiency and effectiveness of the police rather than a conflict situation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gilbert. Nazira, this is your time. A beautiful picture of Johannesburg. The view from your office.
I wish. That is a view of Johannesburg. So I think that we are a city of lots of contrasts, and there's lots of beauty, and I may not have the opportunity to show you some of the on-the-ground challenges, but I think that just from the presentation that Dr. Lawrence has given, he's coming from a provincial perspective. It's almost like the federal perspective if one looks at the German model. And I'm coming from a local government perspective, the municipal perspective. So we're really dealing with the day-to-day issues. We deal with service delivery. And in terms of, I'm not too far from it. In terms of the mandate of local governments, there's more and more responsibility given to local municipalities, authorities. The idea is to really make local authorities more developmental focused. So there's a lot of work that local authorities do on the ground. I am just going to briefly also give you the context of Johannesburg, a bit of the crime scenario as well. And then just discuss, I think I would have loved to have more time to really discuss some of the on-the-ground programs, but I think what I want to just hang the presentation on is really an approach to safety that we've taken at local government level and how that has helped us navigate some of the safety issues in the city of Johannesburg. Very quickly, Johannesburg in context, we are talking now about the Gauteng city region. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the names of our provinces, but Johannesburg is in the Gauteng province, the city of gold. And we're really in the heart of the province, so we kind of in a polycentric situation there. Population of the entire province estimated at 10.5 million. In terms of Johannesburg, we are the economic powerhouse. We have the largest concentration of industries and businesses in Johannesburg. We do generate 17% of South Africa's GDP and employ 47% of Gauteng's economy. Joburg is the main driver of national growth, and I think that is important when we discuss safety issues, and historically performing at 50% higher than the national growth rates. And in terms of the map that you see there, it's really Johannesburg in terms of its other administrative boundaries within Gauteng. I just want to very briefly mention this notion of a Gauteng city region. I think it's important to understand that South African cities are also beginning to see themselves as part of their neighboring municipalities and cities. So instead of talking about Johannesburg as a city, we're beginning to talk about Johannesburg in the context of a larger city region, because I think that economically, in terms of job creation, the cities are navigating each other on a daily basis. So we're not talking about Johannesburg as a single entity, and I think that's quite important. We have a population of 3.9 million people, and approximately 1.3 million households. And I think obviously these are figures that may change. We've just taken a census, and that information will come out in probably a year's time. We have a population that is growing, but at a slower rate, and that's an interesting sort of statistics. I think there's increasing mortality, the impact of HIV and AIDS, but also decreasing fertility rates. It's a pity I can't go into some of the factors, but that just gives you a bit of a picture. Very important, I think, as Johannesburg is the powerhouse of the economy, we do obviously, as South Africa and as a city, experience some of the impact of the global financial downturn. There's increasing migration in our city, both internally and from the African continent. And in terms of regional political governance, as I indicated, I think we administratively talking about cities in terms of a bigger global context. Safety is a challenge in Johannesburg, and I think that it's not as alarming as people have the perception that Joburg is a very unsafe place, and I hope I can change that for you in a minute. However, the citizens of Johannesburg do suffer high levels of insecurity, and I think that must be also understood in the context of the consequences of the historical, geographical, social, and economic engineering and inequalities during the apartheid eras. Insufficient attention is given to other dimensions of safety, such as individual and at a community level, the hazards of fragile cities that we experience. High increases of traffic accidents, fires, environmental risks, and violence and a lack of public safety does affect the quality of Joburg residents, but it is improving. I just want to very quickly share interesting crime statistics with you. If one looks at the contact crimes, there's definitely been a decrease. We've seen a 27% decrease in a 5-year period between 2004 to 2011. Murders have reduced in the city by 30%. Attempted murders have decreased. Assault with grievous bodily harms have seen a decrease, and common robberies have seen a decrease. Just very quickly, what is interesting here, if I can just put that. Oh, it's not going to the hyperlink. It may take long. All right, there's no, okay. No, that's fine. The statistics just show that while the population's increasing, we are seeing a downward decline in crime. So I think that's an important sort of indicator of safety in Johannesburg. In terms of the responsibility of local authorities in crime prevention, I think that there's a very big focus on community development, on urban design management, protection of vulnerable groups, infrastructure upgrades, and improvements to bylaw compliance and enforcement, and emergency and disaster responses. We have a safety strategy in the city, and it also needs to be seen within the context of broader strategies within the city. We've just finalized our growth and development strategy going up to 2040, and safety is a key focus in the growth and development strategy. If one looks at the objectives of the city safety strategy, it's definitely, as local authorities, we may not be responsible directly for policing, but we are saying that as local authorities, we want to contribute as our mandate to the reduction of crime and also improve the perceptions of safety and reduce the fear of crime. And I think this is very important in the Joburg context. We've chosen the notion of improving the perceptions of safety because I think there is a real problem with the way in which people perceive Johannesburg as an unsafe city, even the citizens sometimes. And I think Dr. Lawrence has explained a little bit about the role of national government, provincial governments, but I think this diagram is very important because where we sit as local authorities, I think we're at the heart of trying to ensure that at local level we coordinate the various policies, processes, so that we can actually implement what really matters on the ground. So that structured cooperation between local government, the municipal police, the South African police services, and we do have community police forums, which are statutory bodies. And that coordination at local level is important to achieve some of the objectives that we want to, particularly in crime reduction. The strategy really focuses on 6 key elements, and this is also important because these are the things that the public talk about, it's public issues, public perceptions, and we've kind of hung the strategy on looking at how do we improve public safety by ensuring that there's better bylaw enforcement, crime prevention, urban management. But parallel to that is it can only happen if there's a multi-agency approach. I think if there's collaboration, partnerships, and alignment of internal departments, that's absolutely critical, and we're finding that that's working better and better. Critical to elements of local safety is city leadership. I think that if the mayor of the city, if the politicians, as well as key leaders within different departments buy into the notion of safety and safer cities, I think there is a lot more that people on the ground can do, and that city leadership is very important. We're also trying to ensure that the strategy isn't too broadly focused, so we're focusing on geographic focus areas with a very strong focus on information. And I think Dr. Lawrence alluded to the fact that we cannot rely on crime statistics alone. So at local level, we are able to do some very interesting things. And at the moment, we're in the process of developing a physical and social disorder audit, and that will be overlaid with crime statistics and begin to give us some sense and a picture of the relationship between area-specific problems and some of the crime that's emerging in those areas. This very quickly are the sort of programs that we're focusing on in the safety strategy. I think very important for Johannesburg is reducing gun crime, reducing street crime, and we're also focusing on reducing youth crime. So there's a very important focus in terms of very directed crime problems, hanging the strategy also on things that people need to hear and talk about, taking back the streets, and yet it's in a very positive sense. How do we use our public spaces better? What do we do differently with our public spaces? Creating an orderly city. I think yesterday we heard about less law and more order, and I think we kind of looking at how do we deal with better management of cities from an urban management point of view. Focus surveillance, obviously there's just leveraging how we can do things with technology. This is a very busy slide as well, but it's really saying how we've broken each of those strategic objectives into very small deliverables. South Africa, interestingly enough, we do have a strong focus on liquor and trying to reduce liquor crime. And so we've introduced that, but also looking at addressing the needs of vulnerable groups such as women, the elderly, and the youth. I don't have much time, but just to say that the strategy in terms of its approach is very geographic focused in terms of what we're trying to do. So we don't want to do everything in the whole of Johannesburg at the same time, and we take a very directed approach with a strong emphasis on information and problem solving. And that's how we would obviously analyze an area and work very collectively in a multi-agency sense in how we find what are the priorities and issues in that particular area. It's also a very directed methodology, and we've got a toolkit that basically trains people on how to use this methodology in a specific area. Just very quickly, I think the last thing that I just want to mention is institutionalizing safety in different departmental budgets and their operational activities, and people then are accountable in their performance indicators on taking safety issues into account. And obviously the key idea in Johannesburg is to really reach that tipping point, but often that reaching that meaningful and sustainable impact over time is where all the work and focus needs to happen. So just to round it off, okay, I had some sort of beautiful slides about our city. That's the Mandela Bridge. And just to say that catalytic projects like this have really given Johannesburg an impetus. And there's some sort of lots of redevelopment that has gone around Mandela Bridge, and you can see some loft apartments there as well. That was the soccer stadium in Johannesburg, where the opening and the closing of the FIFA World Cup took place. But just lessons learned, I think an integrated approach is absolutely critical for dealing with safety issues, and I think accountability to political structures at local level make the difference to achieving better safety in cities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nazira. It's a pity that we can't go into the details a little bit more, but we're here today in the afternoon, and please grab Nazira or ask questions if we still have a little bit time left later on.
Thank you very much, and thank you so much to Tina, not only for bringing me here, but also for coming to Johannesburg and to work and to have a commitment to a 10-year process in South Africa. I think we certainly need that kind of exchange. My work over the years started, I thought, in the field of crime and violence, and then I realized that what I was actually working with was vulnerable communities and fragile systems. And much as yesterday, I got very excited when we heard the presentation on design thinking. The process that I work with is also based on design thinking and on a systems model. And it's very much based on asking people to imagine what it looks like when it's fixed, and to move away from a security perspective to a safety perspective. And English is one of the few languages that differentiates between security and safety. And security is about protecting yourself against known or perceived harms or risks, whereas safety is about needing less security. And it's something that we desperately need to think about in South Africa. And in fact, a couple of years ago, on the 20th anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall, the director of the Goethe Institute in South Africa I worked with her for a year to prepare to drop the wall around the Goethe Institute in Johannesburg against enormous opposition, which said, how can you possibly do that? It's going to make the place so insecure. But whereas they had had incidents of theft before the wall came down, they've had none since. And what we did was we went through this process of imagining how we could make that place safe instead of constantly trying to keep it secure. And we know that when we secure things, very often what we do is we push the innovation into the hands of the criminals. And so very often what we're doing is responding to their innovative approaches rather than actually driving the innovation ourselves. So the social transformation system methodology aims to facilitate sustainable community safety and to ask people in communities, if this is the mess we're in, and as Nazira and Gilbert both pointed out, a lot of the mess that we're in is the result of the social engineering of the past. We are the victims of the policies of generations in South Africa that, for instance, put the poorest people the furthest away from the opportunities. We fragmented families, we separated people from the opportunities for learning, for contributing, for being a part of a sustainable future. And now we have to transform that process. And I don't think anybody understood in the early 90s just how hard it was going to be. And so it is, I think, we need to start from a position of deep compassion when we deal with the issues of unsafety in South Africa. So the idea is to mobilize people around a vision, around a dream. And one of the things that didn't happen in South Africa for generations was that people were asked to dream. And now very often when we do this, and the methodology that I use asks people to draw, because very often the hierarchies within consultative groups make it impossible for people to really speak out, still today. It's very often the first time that people have been asked to dream of a vision of what it looks like when it's fixed. And because, in fact, we share so much more than we don't share in terms of our dreams for the future, it was possible then to model that vision and to start to work with it as a methodology. So one of the key issues about it is that it turns upside down the usual notion of government. Certainly in South Africa, we always see our three-tiered government with national government on top, have the kind of a drip-down process. And I was in a workshop one day where somebody from national government referred 32 times after I started counting to the word down. We're going to go down to grassroots. We're coming down to the community. We're going to cascade our policies. We're going to send our resources down. Till eventually I kind of felt as though I was drowning. And so I turned it upside down and said, what happens if you do that? If you put people and local government on top, and you put the other tiers of government and support in a supportive role, where their role is to try and create an even keel. And what happens then is that you need to take a much more creative approach to the notion of policy, to the notion of visionary leadership, and to the notion of resource allocation and treasury. And so this whole model is based on the notion that people are on top, that unless you can create that even keel at a local level, no policies have any value to people in terms of safety. And that in itself will create stability through the feedback that comes from local level back into policies, back through the political processes, and through an understanding of what works and what doesn't work at local level. So the outcomes of the process that we run, which are a very creative, consultative, design thinking approach, are to create a consensus about what it is that we're aiming to achieve. And that's very interesting. And of course, different role players have different contributions. So women bring very different issues into that picture of what it looks like when it's fixed. Kids do, young people do, professional people do, people who use the streets versus people who use private transport. Everybody brings a different picture, but everybody wants certain things that are the same. And of course, one of those key things is a better life for our children than we have led or are leading. And I think that bringing together is a very important part of the process. It's a transparent and honest disclosure of what's in it for me. In our environment, because we're a developing environment, because there's a very big gap between rich and poor, between haves and have-nots, very often the relationship is a one-way relationship. The assumption is that somebody's giving and somebody's receiving. And what this process does is it shifts that. It says, why are you giving? What are you getting out of it? And what can you give rather than just receive? And so it becomes a much more creative partnership. We do a rapid assessment based on intuitive knowledge of the current situation. And so our indicators that we use are indicators that people can know things about. And it's the most wonderful part of the facilitated process because people bring that knowledge into the room and they fight for those scores. We do everything on a 4-point score where we measure everything in terms of if that's what it looks like when it's fixed, how far are we from it? And all the indicators are things that people know things about it at local level. We develop very pragmatic action plans where people can only commit themselves to things. I can't say, I'm going to do this and you're going to do that. If you haven't committed yourself to it, then that's a gap. And if we need to do what it is that you bring, we need somehow to work with you to make sure that you will bring it. And it has to reflect mandates and responsibilities. We found, for instance, that local participants such as police will very often commit themselves to things that have nothing to do with policing, despite the fact that the policing elements are not covered in any particular plan. So there's a consensus on the indicators on progress and an agreement of what we can achieve together towards a state of what it looks like when it's fixed. It's an optimistic, restorative, and inclusive approach. The optimism is essential. We have to create a sense that we can do things and that working together we have a greater likelihood of succeeding. And it's a social contract that binds participants. There is a very simple software system that supports this and that delivers on the basis of an algorithm that's based on research and expert consultation over the years. And what it does as well is offer local people an opportunity to learn to use a very, very simple IT system. And that's very important. One of the things that we tend to forget when we're outside of our environments is how the digital divide really separates people's ability to control their futures. It's not good enough anymore to say, oh, we can't do things on computers because some people don't understand them. the more that we say that, the more we entrench that divide. And so it's very important to be able to offer people an opportunity to manage the destiny of their local strategies through a very simple and very accessible software system. So what it does, in South Africa, we talk all the time about our diversity. Archbishop Tutu said in 1994 that we were a rainbow nation, and we've been suffering from that ever since. We think that it's me and the other, and the other, and the other, and the other. What this process shows is that we share much more than we are different. And that is a very important part of building this really strong collaborations and partnerships that need to happen at a local level. So using a social transformative approach rather than an anti-crime strategy or a addressing violence strategy, rather looking at what does it look like when it's fixed and how do we transform ourselves through working together to something that is very creative and optimistic, something that's really worth carrying with us through the hard times. We do this through developing a very visible social contract in which everybody is very clear about what they bring and in which every single person who participates has a role to play and that each role is as important as any other. We create that vision of what it looks like when it's fixed as a very introspective design process that's enhanced by a world of knowledge and expertise. And I think that in this room alone, we sit with so much knowledge. It seems to me very frustrating if we can't use that to develop intuitive processes rather than always having to do work from scratch to understand local circumstances. So the principles of community ownership and accountability are embedded in all actions, plans, and outcomes. It promotes an optimistic approach. We encourage consensus, and we'll keep working together until we have consensus on what it is we want to do and how we'll know whether or not we're getting there. And it also allows for a relationship between community members and government that is not based on conflict and a sense of blame and failure, but rather on a sense of what can be achieved together. And evaluation is also a shared people. We rescore on an ongoing basis of how we are progressing towards what it looks like when it's fixed. And therefore we're working towards sustainability and social impact rather than just measuring our progress against a set of terms of reference. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Well, thank you very much for these very interesting presentations and for giving us an idea about crime and violence prevention in South Africa. Now, if you have any questions, I'm sure the experts from South Africa and from the project will be pleased to answer them. Please.
I have a question to Dr. Gilbert Lawrence. If I understood right, there are 9 different provinces. Now the question is, the process you described and the situation you described when it comes to the access of the data from the established SAP system, South African Police Service system, and the efforts you are now trying to, in a way or another, get around and involve a lot of other sources of data to complete the official data. Is that situation the same in each and every of these 9 provinces, or is there are there differences between the provinces and the behavior of the police in the different provinces? In other words, has this to do something with a general shift in the behavior of the police, or was this situation ever since 50s, 60s in the same way?
Thank you. Just to respond to say, since 1994, the police force became a police service, and that was part of the change into the new dispensation. All 9 provinces have police commissioners, and they are under the National Police Commissioner. And each of the 9 provinces have, as we've indicated, CPFs, which are statutory bodies under the Police Act. Now, it's the same in all the provinces. In other words, all the provinces have the same mandate in terms of the national constitution, that a province has civilian oversight as a mandate. And we meet as heads of Department of Community Safety, we meet with what is called the National Secretariat, and we have the same frustrations in the provinces. And what we've done is the National Secretariat recently changed under a new act called the National Secretariat Act, and that became more empowered. And part of what they are trying to do is their main function is not in fact civilian oversight, or certainly not in their legislation, but they have asked us to visit the police stations once a year. Now, we don't believe that's adequate oversight, which we'll do. Now, the bill that we are proposing, we've deliberately not called it a Secretariat Act, because there is a National Secretariat. We've called it a Community Safety Act, so that there's no conflict. Is there duplication? Yes, we could be challenged around that, and we are happy to defend that. We've taken legal advice around these issues. The opportunity for the other provinces to duplicate such an act is there. In other words, they could do that as well. So it's not totally, it's unique in that it's the first time it's happened, but it's allowed to happen. But clearly the police may not be comfortable with additional oversight, because currently the current oversight happens by the police, for the police, in the police. And they report, as it were, back on request, or they get called to the legislature, but it's not external, and that's not a healthy situation, we believe.
Yes, I have a question for Nazira. You quickly touched upon a new, I understand it's a new initiative, the disorder audit. Could you elaborate on that? Is it similar to a safety audit that we know, where you bring different parts of the municipal authorities together to discuss not only crime and safety issues, but also housing, social economic development? Sure. Or is it something else?
We have a regeneration project for the inner city, and it's going to be a commuter links project. And what we found is the area in which they want to implement this project has a lot of on-the-ground problems, so what we're referring to as physical and social disorder issues. I had some slides just to give you a sense of what I'm talking about. But the idea really is to then look at what are some of those issues. So we, in stage one, we've plotted it, we've layered it on a GIS map, and we're able to geographically actually pinpoint exactly where the physical and social disorder issues are. We're having a meeting on Monday with the key stakeholders, and then out of that process, I think as part of the implementation of the Commuter Links project, is to see what other departments, entities, agencies can come together to start addressing some of the other issues. But it's obviously, going to grow bigger and bigger, because I can just see that the problems are about housing, the problems are, about better amenities, better social services. But it's actually a very exciting sort of initiative at the moment, because in the absence of sort of day-to-day crime data, you can actually start seeing where the hotspots are in terms of crime, where the difficult problems are in terms of where perhaps there's more drug dealings and things like that. So we will document this, but it's at a very initial stage.
Any other questions? So I might ask you a question myself. I heard that sometimes policemen who have done something wrong are sent to the highly problematic areas, rather than sending the best policemen to the problematic areas. And you're also dealing with police. Can you change that, or has it already been changed, or what's the situation now?
If you ask me if I can change it, I'm acknowledging that it does happen. It is an urban legend. I'm sure it's an urban legend of any country, but certainly not. And I think that what happens with problematic policemen, there are problematic policemen everywhere, and as I've indicated, there are good policemen everywhere as well. What we are trying to do with the with the information gathering would be then to find out, when we get complaints about a particular police station, how many complaints are related to a particular police station. Is it related to a particular police person? And therefore pick up together with the reports that we get back from the police to determine if something has been done adequately, if the problem has been shifted, or if the problem has been dealt with. So no, it's not a kind of universal thing. I want to say certainly in many of the provinces, and certainly in the Western Cape, there's a high participation of communities in what goes on in police stations and the policing. There's a lot in the press, there's a lot in our meetings and so on. So there's a high level of concern, as well as a high level of praise. We've just adopted a national program which is about, now I must remember the name. It's to praise a policeman, to report a policeman, and to praise a policeman, reward a policeman. So report and reward. And we're trying to get that principle through, that this is not a punitive thing. It's not about trying to find rotten eggs or to say that all policemen are bad. But where there's somebody has had good service, we will acknowledge that, and we'll actually try and make sure that that is also dealt with adequately. And where somebody is reported for bad service, that will be dealt with as well. But no, there are not such sort of endemic problems. As you've also heard, there have been complaints about police changing the statistics. When there's too many of a particular crime in the area, then allegedly there's a massaging of the statistics. Now, there are challenges around that as well, and those get reported and they get picked up too. And we can talk about that too.
Any other question? Please.
Barbara, I would be very interested in to hear some experience from a workshop you did with this approach, how it looks like when it's fixed. Could you give us some practical experience or insight on what was the outcome of the workshop?
Yeah, I think for me the biggest outcome is always a clarity of understanding that an integrated approach doesn't mean that we each do everything. So very often it works very well at a local government level, it works very well in a school setting, it works very well on community-based projects. And at the moment, for instance, I'm working on a model for restorative justice. And the outcome is, generally speaking, that people understand their safety, their vision of safety, not in terms of necessarily reduced crime, but in terms of an increase in community cohesion, a shared desire to achieve safer public places, the ability to support one another, greater involvement in school and in other community assets, a sense that, for instance, schools, which are very often not the center of community, as a result of our past in South Africa, very often people do not send children to school in their own community. They think that for their child to have a better life, they must send the child out of that community. In the Western Cape, it even has a name, which is send your child closer to the mountain. And that creates enormous vulnerability. So one of the big outcomes for schools is to look at the way in which that school becomes a center of opportunity and safety if you actually begin to invest collectively in the school, in your environment, instead of assuming that moving your child into another community is important. One of the really wonderful outcomes on a community recently was that between the days in a workshop, the representative from the Department of Social Development came in on the third day of the workshop, and she said that before we started, she wanted to tell us that although the school that we were dealing with had been in her region for 2.5 years, she had never visited the school before. But as a result of being in the workshop, she went to the school the evening before, and she said, and now you'll never get rid of me. I understand why it is that I must work with you and what it is that I can bring to the process. And very often it's that kind of clarity of purpose and the ability to understand the mutual achievement of specific objectives through collaboration that is very important as part of the process.
Well, unfortunately, time is up, but the experts are still here. You can. Well, the last question,
Just
but
1 minute.
very short,
Yeah,
very short.
I'll be short. In fact, I was going to attest to what Papa just said, because when the experience in Durban, using actually, the model that Papa is talking about, in fact, actually, where people are not saying, they're not looking at having police officers on the ground, but they're looking up on themselves, owning the ownership of community. Because when they draw up the pictures, there's no police or police van, but it's only them enjoying actually, the open public spaces. I just wanted to attest to what Papa was saying.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you again to the experts from South Africa.